Sarah Eberhard. Today is August 6th, 2003, and I'm interviewing William Sperry from the Atlanta History Center. Get you to give your name and date of birth.
I'm William Sperry. I was born on December the 16th, 1920 in Raton, New Mexico.
Okay, thank you very much. I know we talked a little bit earlier about how you came to be in the Marine Corps, and I was wondering if we could start at that particular point about how you had told me how you knew that you were going to be drafted, and just maybe a little bit before that, and pick it up from there.
At the time, I was in the building business with my father. I had spent some time in school, but in college, but it didn't work out well, and I was with him. But then when Pearl Harbor, of course, was on the 7th day of December, and I was 21 years old on the 16th day of December. And I knew they had already started the draft program, and they were drafting, you had to draft numbers and so forth. So I had talked with the Air Force, but I had a friend who couldn't make it. I could have gone to the Air Force as a pilot, but he couldn't make that. So he said, I can go in the Marine Corps, and I said, well, so can I. Let's go that way. And we were in Albuquerque, New Mexico, and that's where we enlisted. We weren't sworn in then. We went to Phoenix, Arizona. On actually it was February the 19th in 1942. I was sworn into the Marine Corps in Phoenix, Arizona, and then we went on to San Diego, where I went through boot camp. Of course, in boot camp, I was through they take a raw civilian and turn him into a Marine, and that's a pretty raw process. But you're always grateful for it. You're proud of it, and we always say, you know, there's no such thing as an ex-Marine. Once a Marine, always a Marine, and we're proud of our heritage. When I left boot camp, I went to North Island, because they said I had received my notice that I could go to flight school if I wanted to in the Air Force, and the sergeant there said, well, if you want to fly, you can come, we can do it in the Marine Corps if you want to stay. And I said, all right. So I went to North Island. I was the only man I was the only Marine in my boot camp that didn't go to, because I was already assigned, and I went to North Island, and the rest of them did KP for a month before they went anywhere. So that's where I started at North Island, and I was there about a week, I guess. And one day they loaded us in the truck and took us out to Miramar. There's a big Marine Corps air base at Miramar now, and when we got there was nothing but sagebrush and sand, and they dumped us out of the truck and said, if you want a tent to sleep in tonight, you'll have to build it. And that's when I marked myself as a builder, because I was in the building business with my father, and I knew construction. And when they dumped us out, I got my buddy, he and I were together all the time in the Marine Corps. He was from Elmira, New York, and we were in the same outfit all those years, all 4 years together. But he was there and two other guys, and I said, all right, let's go build us a deck. And I asked the sergeant there, I said, where's he said, the lumber's over there and the tools are in that shack, go to it. And I went and got the tools I needed, and in an hour's time we had a deck already ready. And of course this sergeant was watching all the time. He said, you're going to go over to see Gary but at the same time, I could also type. And the sergeant major took me to his office, and I was a payroll clerk. And it was interesting that I was there, and I was enjoying it, and I was doing real well, and I was learning how to do the payroll, but the CO came, Captain Rigg, I always remember, came to me. He said, I need some warehouses built by these revetments. We had these huge revetments concrete big things where you parked an airplane, and they protected them from any kind of strafing. But on the back side of them, they needed warehouse. I built warehouses, and the captain came to me and said, "Can you build some warehouses?" I said, "Yeah, I can build them. You get me the stuff and the men." And so he said, "Well, if you'll do this for me, I'll take good care of you." Well, this was in February or March of 1942. And he did take good care of me, because by August of 1942, I had already reached the rank of sergeant. But I was working crews of men, and then I went and learned how to build crates, to crate material, because we crated everything from little tiny implements for electrical components in little boxes to whole airplane engines. Had to build a crate. Now, you build a crate for an airplane engine, that's a big, but this is the sort of thing we did. And we were getting ready. Of course, we didn't know where we were going. Everything was quiet. Everything was hush-hush. You couldn't tell anybody anything. I've seen some letters that guys wrote home, and they were all cut up because the censor would cut everything out of them. So I didn't try to let my folks, I tried to I wrote letters. I had a girlfriend. I was engaged to be married. My wife and I were engaged before I went overseas, before I went in the service even. And we hadn't set any dates, but it was understood. And so when I went in the Marine Corps, I told her, I said, "Well, we'll keep in touch." And but I wrote to her, and I faithfully wrote letters every week. I write a letter to my mother and one to my girlfriend, and we were all through that time. And I went home then on a furlough in August of 1942, and I told her then, I said, "Well, I talked to her about getting married, about coming to California, because I was stationed at Miramar at this. It was called what was it? It was an old Army base, but the Marine Corps had it then, and it had an airfield there, and we were stationed there, and one day they brought us some cards. We were getting on building, and I was crating and getting things. We were getting ready to go into combat. We were getting ready to go to South Pacific. We didn't know when, but after I came back she was going to come out there, and she kept waiting for me to send for her. And the next thing she knows, she didn't hear anything. And I had signed a little card, one for my fiance and one for my mother, and on it says, I just put an address on there. But when we left, we couldn't tell them where we were going. Of course, they had the old thing, loose lips sink ships. Yeah. This was the, and we couldn't tell anybody anything, and I couldn't tell her. And for 30 days, they didn't hear from me. And I'm telling you, I was not the fair-haired lad. In those circumstances, of course, the people that had to stay back here and look after, and our loved ones were just as much into this thing as anybody. And they paid as high a price as we did in many respects, because there were a lot of things we couldn't tell them. And I tried every way in the world to get in touch with her. I sneaked off out to a payphone outside the base. And I said, "I want to speak long distance." And the operator said, "Sir, this line has been shut off. You're not going to make any calls." Well, the guys running the... Well, everybody, the guys running the Marine Corps weren't dumb, and they'd been where we were, and they knew we'd try every kind of to get, but I never did get word to her. And when I finally arrived overseas, they got a card and said, "Your Marine has arrived at his overseas base, and here's his address." And they finally realized what had happened. It took us. We were on a Matson lines, the SS Lura line, which was a huge, beautiful, big luxury liner that had been turned into a troop ship. There were 4,000 Marines on that ship, and they'd taken all the salons, and they'd hung bunks up and down in them where the men. But our CO had really fixed us up. We were all in staterooms. There were 4 men to a stateroom, and we were the high-class boys aboard ship. And we had good meals, but the interesting thing, we hadn't been at sea very long till they said, it'll be all right for you to grow a beard or wear a mustache because you're going to have to shave with salt water. And I don't know whether you ever tried that or not, but it's not because the Lurline facilities was not capable of providing fresh water. Because they didn't have 4,000 people on when it was a luxury liner. But and of course we had to save the fresh water for drinking purposes and so forth. You couldn't take a bath even. But you get by with some salt water, and they could pump salt water. This is what we. But when we went to Noumea, 25 days aboard ship. That was a fantastic trip. We saw flying fish, saw some of the most beautiful sunsets I've ever seen in my life. And we had a ball on that big old luxury liner, but then they pulled us we went into Noumea, which is in the Hebrides, and that's when we transferred to an attack vessel then, because then we went from there to the island of Ifati in the New Hebrides, and this was a final training place. We took the first F-4U fighter plane. Our units, people like Joe Foss, Pappy Boynton, these are names that became famous. Joe Foss, became governor later of Nebraska, I think it was. But they were the fighters that we took, and they had the first gull wing. It's called the Corsair. The wings came down. And by putting a gull wing on, they raised the front of that plane where you could put a 14-foot prop on there. And this was a plane that could deal with the Zeros. And the Japanese Zero would make monkeys out of all the other fighter planes we had because they were not as maneuverable. But the Corsair became the answer, and we put a lot of armor plate in there to protect our pilots, and they could shoot them full of holes, and yet they'd bring that plane back in because they were protected with armor plate, and they sacrificed some maneuverability, but they were still would stand. And one little burst of a 50 caliber gets into a Zero, and down it went. This was the difference. But this was the turning point in the South Pacific part of World War II when we began to. When we captured, then I went from New Hebrides. We were there for I don't know how many months, but we stayed there, and then our next stop was Guadalcanal.
Now, when did you arrive in Guadalcanal?
That was in 1943, and I don't remember the exact month, but we came to Guadalcanal, and of course it was pretty well secured then. We had Henderson Field, and Henderson Field was the huge field where they could land and take off B-24s and B-17s. These were the big bombers. They couldn't. When they bombed Japan, they flew off of aircraft carriers because that was as close as they. But when they got Henderson Field, then we had a base where the big bombers could get off and take. And this is when they began to really do some damage to the enemy. And I was with the headquarters squadron, MAG 12, Marine Air Group 12, in the 1st Marine Air Wing. And my job was, because I was a builder, I was in charge of the carpenter shop. And I had all that, and I built equipment, I built shops, and I took care of the boys. I always took care of the cooks down at the galleys because they were the boys. If I wanted a coffee pot and I needed some coffee and put it in my shop, and because if they needed a table, they'd say, "Sperry, can you get me a table?" "Yeah, what do you want?" And I'd build them a table. And I took care of the guys at transportation because I got a Jeep that I had that was my Jeep, and they took care of that for me, and I took this is all, this is the way it works. But we had a unique experience, of course, on Guadalcanal. The airfield was paved with Martzen mats. Now, Martzen mats is a metal component that fits down, and they put it down, and they can land these. And if they'd bomb us and they'd bomb the airfield, they just pull that section out and put a new section in. And we maintained the airfield there so that the planes could land and carry on. And at one time for 90 days we were bombed every night, or they dropped what they dropped. Japanese had what they called, you may have remembered over in Iraq, they talked about the daisy cutters, the daisy cutter bomb. This was a bomb that was built with a long rod sticking off of the end of it. And when that rod hit the ground, it detonated the bomb, and instead of it bursting into a shower like this, it went through this way. And you could hear that. We crawled in our holes. That was the first thing you did when you landed on the beach. You dug a foxhole, and because they could strafe and this. But when we built our tents and then down the side we built our dugout, and we dug a hole that was as big as this room just about for 4 of us, and then we took palm trees and laid logs down for palm trees, and then we put armor plate on top of that, and then about 2 foot of dirt on top of that, and we were safe down in there. And except when those bombs got to shooting, and the dust would come down off the side of that dugout. But it was it's scary.
And did you ever have much warning?
Oh yeah, we had. You see. But by the time we got there, we had these Australians, and they were on little islands, and they could tell us when they were coming, and they'd notify us. But one of the problems we had, every squadron, and you had fighter squadrons, and you had bomber squadrons, and you had torpedo bomber squadrons, and then you had the headquarters squadron, and each squadron had its own air raid alarm. And that was probably a brake drum or something that would ring good, and you'd hang it up in a tree. And when you got a condition red, bing, 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 that's condition red, boy, down to the holes you went. But the sad thing about it, sometimes you could hear the alarm of the next squadron, and theirs was just backwards. And they would ring condition red, and we thought it was all clear, and so they'd turn. And we had a big generator that generated electricity for the whole squadron, all the tents. And it's amazing. The thing that always amazed me, and I've always thought about it, the ingenuity of the American GI. We built all kinds of. We built a shower, and we built all kinds of things for the conveniences of the home, just to make the life a little bit better. But we had a lot of problems because we didn't have a central alarm system, and and one night we'd had a condition red, and we heard the all clear. And I had to go to the head. That's the latrine. They call them a head in the Marine Corps. But it was about 100 yards up through the jungle away from the camp. And so I had to go to the head. And so we heard the condition all clear, So we turned on the lights. The generator was going. I went to the head, and I was sitting up there, and all of a sudden, I heard someone turn out those goddamn lights. And somebody, it was all, because here they came. Well, I heard that, and I reached up and turned out the light in the head and started through the door. And about that time, a flare was dropped. And boy, that flare lit up the whole. And of course, they were dropping bombs in. And I took off down through that jungle, And I mean, if there'd have been someone there to clock me, I broke the world's record for a 100-yard dash because I'd come flying. And my buddies kept saying, "Where's Sperry? Where's Sperry?" Because and you didn't go get in somebody else's hole. You wanted to be in yours because sometimes you just. So and they heard me coming and they said, "Clear the door." But these are some of the things that we. It was devastating, and you lived in constant. Well, for 90 days we were bombed every night. Didn't have any rest. Kept us up and down, and everybody was tense and on edge, and we were fighting one another rather than the Japs. But this was what they were after. This is why they harassed us. One night.
Were you ever wounded in any of these?
No, I was very fortunate. I hurt myself sometimes, but I think if I'd have stayed in my bunk one night, it'd have been the end of it. Because one night I mean, those daisy cutters, you could hear them going. You could hear that shrapnel through the jungle. We were down in our holes, and. It had been a real blow. They had really laid it on us. And our tents would be all full of holes. And we'd have to turn them. We'd put 2 tents up there and then turn them. But anyway, came back and we slept at that time we were sleeping in folding, these old camp cots that you fold up, a little old bitty mattress on them underneath them. And then we had a mosquito bar, a rack that you put on that fit into little holes on the cot, and then you put mosquito netting over that and tuck it in around you, because mosquitoes eat you alive. And of course we had a real problem with malaria. It was there, so we'd really been pasted that night. It was a devastating blow, and so it was all clear. And I went back, I crawled in my sack, tucked my mosquito netting down, and boy, I laid down there, and man, the mosquitoes were eating me up in there. And I'd got my flashlight out and I was looking all around, and man, they were all over the place. And I started inspecting my mosquito netting, and right here on this part of my mosquito netting, there was a hole that big. And a chunk of shrapnel had come through that netting, through my mattress, and out into the ground. I guess that reminded me that I never did go to sleep through an air raid. But boy, that's as close as that. But I was, we had people. A few people had trouble with some snipers, but when we went to Guadalcanal, it was pretty well all clear. The only thing we did see a lot. We were bombed a lot, but we had notice of it. We always had. We were ready to get when we were prepared when they came. But I was there and saw one of the final attempt. The Japanese kept trying to get Guadalcanal back because they knew that we took it away from them, and it cost us heavily because they were well fortified, but and they kept trying to get it back, and they tried hard, and finally though but one day every plane on that island went up, and of course Guadalcanal, not a big island. It's a big where there was 2 fighters, armed Air Force fighter squadrons, and then of course there was the bombers that came in. The big people. There were squadrons of big bombers, and then of course the Marine Corps fighter squadrons. And but one day we got word that the bogies were coming. They called them bogies because they came from Bougainville. That's the next end. We got the bogies were coming, and so we got ready for them. And every plane on that island was put in commission and was flying. They were way up high, way up above them. And pretty soon we saw the Japs coming, and coming in formation. There's some over there. There's some over there. Boy, they were coming. And then all of a sudden, all hell broke loose because our men, they were down on top of them. They shot down 102 Japanese planes that day and only lost 3 Americans. And that was the last big attempt. we got a newspaper article that told about that several weeks after that it happened, and I remember reading this. The writer said that airplanes were falling from the sky like leaves in the fall of the year, and that was the case. But that was a devastating defeat because that was their last big attempt.
And that was what was the date on that?
Couldn't tell you dates.
Okay.
But this was in roughly probably 43 or 42. Well, I was 43 and 44, somewhere along in there. See, I went in 1942, and it came out in 1946. And I was right on the day when my enlistment was up. I was discharged because the war was over, and if you got points for so many days, so many months overseas, and if you had a family, and at that time I was married and had a little girl, when it came time, I was discharged then in April of 1946. But I had a fantastic experience. Of course, when we came back from overseas, I came back and went to Miramar, and that's where we had our furloughs when we got in. We got our clothing. Man, it was nice to get good clothes again, and all the good things that happened. Never will forget on board this. We came back on the USS Hunter. No, it wasn't the Hunter Liggett. It was named for it was an army. It's an interesting thing. The Army had some ships that they transported veteran people back from overseas, and this was an Army ship, but it had a Navy captain, and it was all Army personnel on board ship. Of course, you always had the dog faces and the jar heads. There was always, but it was interesting. They would fight among themselves, and we always, we would hoorah one another, but let a foreigner come along. I remember one night in San Diego, there were a bunch of limey sailors. Now, a limey sailor is from England. And they were walking up and saying, well, how is it here in the colonies, And they were stirring for trouble. And I remember this great big old sailor was standing, English sailor was standing, and he said, well, the only color they left out of the American flag was a yellow streak. And brother, that there were sailors, there were Marines, there were all of them, and they had been watching. These guys had been stirring trouble. They ran them off of the docks into the ocean down at the end of the main street of San Diego, where there's a big dock down there. They said, if you don't like America, stay out of it. But this to give you some idea of how you don't talk about the American GI, brother. They all stuck together and did. It was interesting enough. Before I went into service in October of 1941, I had decided that I was going to be a minister, and I had surrendered to preach, and that was where I was headed. Well, Uncle Sam, they kind of but do you know, all the time I was in the service, the first Sunday I was in service, I went to chapel, and the chaplain had a chaplain service, and I had grown up in the church. My father was a deacon all my life. In fact, when I was born, I probably had 9 months of perfect attendance at church, because my mother they were very, and I was reared in the church, and I learned to, and I could sing all the hymns, and I attended chapel. When we got to Ifadi, we went to Ifadi before we went to Guadalcanal. When we got to Ifadi, there was a chaplain there, a Catholic priest, who was one of the best friends I ever had. We were the greatest of friends, Father Shea. And the first Sunday, he conducted worship service. He had his Catholic service, and then he had a Protestant service. And I went, and he said, "Is there anybody here can lead the singing?" And I said, "Yeah, I can." And I knew the hymns, I knew the music. We didn't have any accompaniment, and so I led the singing, and we got that started. And I had, of course, the guys all knew I was going to be a preacher, and I had a lot of friends, and they come. But the chaplains, wherever I went, I worked with chaplains, and when we finished at Guadalcanal, in other words, we went down to New Zealand. And I spent 6 weeks in Auckland, New Zealand, in what they now call R&R. And we didn't have anything to do but go on liberty and consort with the girls from New Zealand. And I had a delightful time there. I met a young girl, her name Mahoney. And it's an interesting thing. I went to her home and we dated. I was still engaged to be married, but that was over there. And I had no intention just to have a date. And I went to their home, and her mother could make the best scones you ever ate. And she made apple pies, and they treated me like a king. I was just, and had the most. I was only there 6 weeks, and had a delightful time. And she later wrote me and said, "Well, I fell in love with you." And I said, "Well, I'm glad I didn't. I never ever had any intentions other than just to be a friend." And but when the interesting thing was when I got ready to. I knew we were going back to Guadalcanal from New Zealand, and the time had come for us to go. And I went down to a flower shop. You could buy flowers. Orchids grow wild in New Zealand. And I went in and I put a 10-pound note. Now that's. And of course we were millionaires. Our money was much more valuable, and I didn't realize what I was doing. And I put a 10-pound note at the flower shop, and I said, "Now just fill it, buy all the flowers this will buy, and I want you to take them out to Mrs. Mahoney's house." And I put in a thank you note for the way she had treated me and how they had welcomed me in their home, and how this girl's daddy tried his best to get me to buy some land down there. He was looking for a son-in-law. But anyhow, I didn't realize it, but I'd have bought a truckload of flowers. And I saw Mary the next day, and she said, "Oh, boy, are you the fair-haired boy?" And I said, "What happened?" She said, "Well, the truck rode up, and they just started carrying these flowers in." It was ostentatious, really, but I realized that. I was just wanting to do something nice for the lady who had treated me so well while I was there. But this is some of the things these are the things that you enjoy. I spent some time with the Maoris in a place called Otahuhu, where they had the hot springs. And we went up there, rode a narrow gauge train to Otahuhu, and then rented a car and drove on the wrong side of the road. But we had a delightful time there, and had a good time in Victoria Park in Auckland, New Zealand. And then we went back, and then when we went back to Guadalcanal, well, first we went to back to Ifati in the New Hebrides, and then we went back to them because we came home from overseas from Guadalcanal. But on the island of Ifati, before we went back to Guadalcanal, the chaplain there was a Methodist chaplain had come in addition to the Catholic chaplain, and he was having a Bible study, and I got to know him real well. And one day he said to me, "Would you like to preach?" And I said, "Well, my pastor told me that when I said I haven't been to college, and I have any training, but I said I can preach. I guess I'll try it." And I had enough background in it to do it. He said, "Well, there's a radar unit way up on the top of a mountain on the island of Ifati, and it was all black men. It was an African. They were all black. And he said, I'm supposed to conduct a worship service, and if you go up there and preach for me, I'll get you a Jeep and you can go up there. And so every Sunday I get my Jeep and I drive up there, and these guys were interesting, fantastic.
What group were they?
They were black men, and they ran the radar unit up there on that mountaintop.
They were Marines also?
No, they were Army.
They were Army.
But the chaplains worked and I would drive up there, and they had the most beautiful crap table you ever saw they had built. These guys in the service, we did all things. But they fixed it, and they folded it down and turned it over and turned it into a pulpit. And I used that in but we had the best time, and I had a good time with it. But I got some of my first preaching experience while I was still in the service. Before we left Ifadi, the last, we were getting ready to go back into combat, and all of the sick and the disabled had been sent back to the States. And we were getting ready to go back, and the chaplain said to me, he said, "You've got to preach for me on this." And he told me that 2 or 3, next Sunday after next, he said, "I'm going to be on board ship, and I can't get back, and I don't want you to preach for me." I said, "Okay." And I didn't realize it till about 4 or 5 days before Sunday. We went to the movies. Now our movies was a big old screen outside, and then logs laid down, and you sat on the logs and watched the movies. And we were going to a movie night, and my friend said, I saw the lights on in the chapel, and I said, "What's going on at the chapel?" He said, "I don't know." He said, "I guess they're getting ready for Easter." And the Sunday I was to preach was Easter Sunday. And everybody went to church on Easter Sunday, And the Catholic, my friend Shay was there. And so when I got to the chapel Sunday morning, and I figured I got me an Easter sermon and put it all together, and I got to the chapel was packed, full, and they were standing around at the windows. I had a standing room only. I had the big crowd there, but I had a good time with that. And the interesting thing about that was, I didn't realize I'd even forgotten much of what I'd done, because after the training I had, you forget some of it. Anyhow, we had a reunion of Mag 12 in Tulsa, Oklahoma, about 50 years after the war was over. And we all got together. Some guy put it all together and got a hold of a whole bunch of us. And we met there in Tulsa. And guys came up to me and said, "I remember the sermon you preached." And but it was this is all part of the way it went. But I preached all over all the time of the service. I got plenty of opportunities. When the chaplains found out what I was doing, they said, "Well, come on, listen," and they did. We just had a good time with it.
And that led right into your career.
Oh yeah. My first preaching experiences were good for me. I learned a lot of things, and then I came back, of course, and went back. When I got back, I got out of the Marine Corps in February of 1946, and in June of 1946, I enrolled at New Mexico State Teachers College, which is now Western New Mexico University. And I was employed by the Baptists of New Mexico to start a BSU program on the campus there, Baptist Student Union. And it's a program. It's real. We got them all over the colleges everywhere, and it's one of the best things Baptists ever did, because it was designed to keep our students, when they go to college, connected to the church during the college careers. And I got involved in that, and still involved. I work with them one down incidentally, I'm still pastoring a church in Atlanta. And you know how old I am. And I tried to retire 25 years ago. And I've been serving a church in downtown Atlanta, off of what used to be Stewart Avenue. It's now called Metropolitan Parkway, but the Capitol View Church, which is now United Baptist Church. I've been there 18 years and still serving as a pastor.
And you started that, you mentioned to me earlier on the GI Bill.
When I came back, the GI Bill, made it possible for me to go to college. I got my degree. Fortunately, I can sing, and because I had a unique thing, a wonderful music teacher in my first 12 years of my schooling. But I was able to take voice lessons and learn to sing, and of course I learned a lot of things there. And of course then I pastored for 3 years and then went on to seminary. And all of the training, everything, all of my service time, I wouldn't take anything for it. It was a great experience, and I felt like I did what I should do for my country, and I've been proud of myself, of what I did, and I'm proud to have been a Marine. There's just something about the Marine Corps that's a little bit better than anybody else, but then that's the way you feel about it, you know. But this is part the big part of it.
At the time it was going on, when you look back, when you were there and you were at Guadalcanal, did you have any idea of the magnitude or how much of an impact what you were a part of in history?
You know that never dawns on you. You know, the things I did then were just a part of servicemen's lives, and I had no idea of what the impact would be and what it would be. I read Tom Brokaw's book, The Greatest Generation, and of course he paid a tribute to us, a fabulous tribute to the guys that served. And I did just the thing that he said. I had my whole life interrupted for the war, but then I came back and was able, because of the GI Bill and what they did, I got a college education. And it was a great experience, and everything that's happened since then, even to this day, we still, I think about, and whenever I see a Marine Corps uniform, I want to stand a little taller, and because there's something about it that stays with you. They hammer some stuff into you. Well, it's just a matter of esprit de corps.
Well, and that brings up another question I was going to ask you, especially with the recent events in Iraq. How does that make you feel when they're recognizing a Marine unit or interviewing a Marine? How does that?
You stand just a little taller, and you say, "I've been there and done that," and you understand what they do and what they mean. My family, my wife's father was a Marine in World War I and was in the Pacific. And then I, of course, came along and I was a Marine. And then my son was a Marine. He was drafted in the Vietnam thing. And he was a lieutenant in the Marine Corps, and he spent 4 years in the Marine Corps. And then I had a grandson, who was a Marine, and his car was blown off of a bridge in Carolina during a storm, and we lost him. He was 21 years old, but he was a Marine. So we had four generations of Marines in my family. But I had two brothers that were sailors, and then a brother that had two brothers that were in the Army. I'm the oldest of 11 children, and there's 6 of us still living. And my mother had 5 sons in World War II. You think about what, now anybody, you don't know what they go through. My mother, bless her heart, was a great lady, but she was able to cope with it. She wrote every one of us letters, looked after us. It was fantastic. But she survived all of that, and all of us came back.
My goodness.
And all of us came back without a scratch. And this was, all of these things, it makes you wonder sometimes, because a lot of people were devastated, and we lost a lot of people. And When I used to walk along the beach at Guadalcanal and go down, there's Iron Bottom Bay, as they call it, down when they had they sunk so many ships up in that battle of the Coral Sea, and it was devastating. And I think about what it cost, and our nation and our freedom is a costly thing, and it's cost us a lot. And what the men do and what they're doing today. I think about, and of course the sad thing today is that the politicians are playing this war thing for all, trying to get it, and they're using it their own ends. And the president, I think, is doing a good job. I think he's trying his best to do what's best and take care of the situation. But here again, it's a great nation, and I'm one of those flag-waving GIs that think this is the greatest nation in the world.
Absolutely.
And all you have to do is go to a foreign land, and you'll find out how great this nation is. Everybody there wants to come here. I don't care what you talk about. This is the great land of opportunity, and there's no other place in the world that has what we have. And this is what makes it worthwhile to make the commitment that you make to keep this country free. And we have, as I say, the greatest nation in the world. And the whole world is looking to this nation for direction and guidance. And of course we bail them out all the time too with what we have to do. But it's tremendous. But I never realized, your question, when I was in it, man, we were having a good. We had fun when we had fun. We were scared to death together. I think about on Guadalcanal, we had a fellow named Stover, and he always had he was real black, had a black beard, and he needed to shave most of the time. But he was a metal worker and a welder, and he became known as Smoky Stover. And old Smoky found a big old jar about this big around and about this high, and it came up to a long neck, and he brought that over and put it down in his dugout. And then he went to the cooks, and he got all the raisins he could find. And I mean, he had 10 or 15 pounds of raisins, and he put all those raisins in that jar, filled it up half full of water, and then poured a bunch of sugar down in there, and then put a stopper in the top of it, and let it work. And one night you heard a boom, and someone said, "There goes Smokey's Raisin Jack." And he had the whole outfit drunk on Raisin Jack. But that's the GI. There's all kinds of things. We built a shower. You didn't have to have any walls because we didn't have any women where we were. And we built a shower and run a rack up. And we needed hot water, so we pumped it through the radiator of it. We got a radiator off a big old semi and set it up and put a motor in it and pumped that water so we'd have hot water to shower in. But this is the way. This is, and I've always marveled at the ingenuity of the American GI. You go anywhere in the world, they'll work out something, and they'll put something together and make life easier.
Well, who would have thought this time around that there'd be such a use for baby wipes?
Oh yeah,
yeah.
That's
what they.
But this is all a part of the whole operation. But this is the way it works.
Great. Well, I think we're about. Oh, we do have a little bit more time then. Okay. Well, I'd like for you to continue telling a few more of these stories, like you were just talking about your getting the shower in and all those kind of things. Some of the things you guys came up with.
Well,
some of the fun, some of the adventures or misadventures that you had.
Well, some of the misadventures were happened on Liberty. But, let me think of the things we did. It was interesting how we could find, I had one of the best pinups of all the, I inherited And I'll tell you the story of the Dallas Huts. Dallas Hut was a building that it was prefabricated. You had two great sections like this right here with a floor, and they were 4 by 8. So when you got through, you had an 8 by 8 building. And if you built them, and you could put 3 of them together and have an 8 by 60 long, them have a barracks, and we lived in those things. That's the barracks we had. And you built them; they came the 4 walls, and the roof was 4 triangles that came down together like this, and you fit them all together. And one day a lieutenant showed up in our outfit on the island of Fadi, and he'd come from the other side of the island, and he was looking for, he loaded up a plane with these Dallas Huts, and we got them all loaded on the plane. And never will forget the day we was standing there, and he had loaded up the plane, and the lieutenant was there, and the first thing he said is, "Where's the head?" And this Pollock was there, said, "Sir, the whole island of Ifadi is staring you in the face. You don't need a head." But anyway, he asked the question. He said, "Now, what kind of tools do you need to put this hut together?" Well, now, if you got the floor perfectly level, and if you got the 4 walls perfectly plumb up and put together, those 4 tops would just fall right in, and all you had to do was screw them together. But that wasn't the case, and it was awful tough. Getting the tops down was a real chore. And this Pollock, what was his name? Can't think of it, but anyhow, the lieutenant said, "What kind of tools do you have to put these together?" And he said, "Lieutenant, all you need is a crowbar and a good vocabulary."
Let me ask you something else.
Yeah.
You mentioned earlier you had one reunion. How did you stay in touch on an individual basis, or did you have many reunions? Have you continued to stay in touch?
We had 2 or 3 more, but by now many of them are all gone. But one guy put it all together and began to write everybody. He ran us down. He located all of us, and he sent us a letter. And I guess there were the first one we had in Tulsa. I guess there were maybe nearly 100 or 150 of the guys all got to, it was a great reunion. Man, we had the best time, and we talked about, all these things that and saw guys that we hadn't seen in years. And we had a real good time with that. And then we had another one later. We had one in Tennessee, and then we had another one down here in Georgia. And I wasn't working on. I wasn't the host for that one, but it was here in Georgia, and we had one there. But it was, they're tremendous. But you hear, you talk about things that you did, and you meet, and it's amazing where a lot of them went. I think I was the only one, I think it was one other guy that was a minister. The rest of them were all and had different pursuits in life. But we had a good time, and we had the sergeant major from the Marine Corps come and bring greetings from the commandant when we had these meetings. And then here in Atlanta, are you familiar with Ludlow Porch?
Yeah.
Ludlow is an old Marine, and he has the Blue Willow Grill over there in North Lake Mall. And every year he has a birthday party for the Marine Corps.
I didn't know that.
And we get together over there. And I didn't go last year. I missed the date. And but year before last, I was the oldest Marine there. And so we had, and he gets together. He has a color guard come, and from out in the Marine Corps base out there, they bring in a color guard. And then he gets, and we had a proclamation from the commandant of the Marine Corps, and they cut a cake, and they have a good time together. It's a great program.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I was going to say, maybe even tell us a little bit more about that here in Atlanta, we might be interested to hear about the marine activities here like that. Is that the pretty
There's
much
some
the main
others
thing?
that I know about. The fellow I bought my car from said they have another outfit has. I don't know about them. I haven't been involved. He was going to tell me about it, but I never ever heard from him. And then there's a Marine Corps Reserve outfit here, and there's some other Marines who get together. Some of the old, but this one, Ludlow Port's is the one I've been. I've been there several times for that one, but. I haven't been to the others. I don't know about them.
What time of the year is that one that Ludlow?
Well,
Forest does?
Ludlow does it on the Marine Corps birthday, which is November the 10th,
Okay.
or around November the 10th.
Yeah.
It usually pushes it to, well, Friday is a little better off that week.
And I know where it's the restaurant, the Blue Willow you're
Yeah,
talking about.
yeah.
It's in the shopping center outside
Yeah.
of North Lake Mall.
Yeah,
Right.
yeah. But they have a big time in it. Listen, I need to go to the little board's room. I'll be
Okay,
right back.
well, that's just, we can go ahead and